Welcome back. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the UK's Foreign Secretary David Cameron Israel will make its own decisions on how to respond to Iran's attack, adding that his government will do everything necessary to defend itself. Lord Cameron's been in Israel today, urging restraint in response to the Iranian drone and missile attack over the weekend. Earlier, he called on the Israeli government to be smart as well as tough. Israel's repeatedly vowed to retaliate in response to more than 300 projectiles sent by Iran and its proxies on Saturday night into Sunday. Joining me in the studio now, TalkTV's chief political commentator Peter Cardwell.
Hi.
And down the line, I'm joined by Dr Efrat Sopher, an expert on Iran and board chair at the Ezri Center for Iran and Gulf States Research. Hello there. And by Dr Kim Howells. Thank you, Dr Howells, a former Labour MP and former Foreign Office and Counter-Terrorism Minister. I might start with Dr Kim Howells on this one. When Barack Obama came over here to the United Kingdom and started giving us advice on what to do about Brexit and telling us we'd be very short-sighted indeed to vote in favour of it, we didn't take kindly to that at all. We didn't like that one bit. Why is it assumed, or is it assumed, that Netanyahu will take kindly to David Cameron counselling him to be wise or smart or keep a cool head? Do you think Netanyahu deems himself in need of advice from David Cameron?
I remember very well inadvertently trying to give Netanyahu some advice, and he told me where to get off immediately. I've no doubt whatsoever that Netanyahu he'll listen to Lord Cameron quite properly. Of course, he knows a bit about diplomacy. He's going to say, well, we're very appreciative for what you've done in helping us shoot down Iranian missiles, but Israel's going to make its own decisions about what it does. It's a nation that's been under attack for a very long time, and quite frankly, I don't think they need any advice from us, and certainly not any orders from us about the way in which they're going to react to this massive attack from Iran.
I mean, obviously, we all understand why David Cameron is counselling Netanyahu not to retaliate. We get that clearly. People are living these days all over the world in fear of some kind of mighty conflagration that involves our country and other countries, and, lots of people losing their lives unnecessarily should Israel attack speedily in retaliation. Obviously, Netanyahu knows this. It's not like he doesn't realise and he needs lots of other people to point it out to him. So what do you imagine he might do as a retaliation? He said he will retaliate. Might it be nominal? Might it be a face-saving manoeuvre of some kind? Or might it be something that potentially does endanger the safety of the rest of the world?
It's anybody's guess at the moment. I mean, I think that he's got to be seen to be doing something if he's going to keep the right wing of this insanely kind of diverse government that he's got in Israel at the moment. He's got to do something which appears to project a strong image from Israel, that it's fearless, that it's not going to back down or do nothing in the face of this unprecedented attack. What exactly he'll do is going to depend, I think, on how he reads the international situation. And that's why it was important for Cameron to go out there and to make Britain's or the United Kingdom's government's views known very clearly to him, that there's an enormous amount of saber rattling going on. It must stay as a rattle and not turn into a full-scale huge war, which could affect everyone in the world, actually, not just the Middle East.
Absolutely. Let's bring Efrat Sopher into this. So we hear what David Cameron is trying to do with Netanyahu in Israel today, but what do you suppose is going on in Iran? They were very clear, weren't they? We have sent the 300 missiles over. That's it. We're not intending to do anything else. That's our manoeuvre. The world has seen us do this. We've been seen to have done it. It's done. It's finished. But Iran must know that Israel, particularly with Netanyahu at the helm, is, let's say, unlikely to leave it there. So what's going on, really?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Vanessa. And I think what we need to highlight is that Saturday night, when Iran directly attacked Israel, was a massive paradigm shift within Iranian thinking. And at the same time, we also saw a pretty spectacular coalition of states that saw the threat that Iran has posed and now poses directly, not only to Israel, but to states that value peace and stability within the international system. So the Iranians are poised and listening and watching. And also Iran's allies, Russia and China, are watching. And so it's critical for Israel and her allies to send a message to Iran that such direct attacks are dangerous and will not be tolerated. And so I would wager that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the war cabinet now is considering very carefully one of the pillars of Israeli foreign policy, which is deterrence, which means deterrence but not escalation or revenge. And so the Iranians will really be watching to see what the next move will be.
What kind of deterrent are we talking about here? Like what, for example?
I think, if it's impossible to tell, but it's a deterrent against Iranian weapons capabilities. We saw the use of over 300, a combination of drones, of missiles that are very dangerous, and incidentally were also being used by Russia against Ukraine. So this is very worrying. So I think Iran's proxies would be a matter of really securing deterrence. Any matter of Iranian capabilities, either around the world or within Iran, I think all options are on the table, while being mindful that Netanyahu would not want to escalate this conflict.
Let me bring Peter Cardwell into the discussion. The missile attack by Iran on Saturday night into Sunday has put Israel in a somewhat different place from the places it occupied just prior to that. How has that happened, and what would you describe the difference as?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question, a really good point, actually, in terms of how this has changed, because we've gone from a situation where the terrible Hamas terrorist atrocities on the 7th of October meant a huge amount of sympathy, rightly, for Israel. Then, as the conflict in Gaza has continued, the war there, and the civilian casualties have gone into the tens of thousands, Israel has been criticised to a huge degree. It was only a couple of weeks ago that we were talking about whether we were even going to sell arms to Israel at all in this country. Now, had we not been there for Israel over the course of Saturday night into Sunday, well, the outcome might have been different in terms of the UK shooting down those drones. So certainly from a Ministry of Defence perspective, governmental perspective, it's a different thing, and the allyship with Israel, it goes far beyond the last 6-7 months. Well, that is something which has come into play here. Certainly in terms of public opinion, I think Israel is, there's more sympathy for it. The question really is what it does next, and there, as we've heard, of course, there's a lot of pressure for Israel to do nothing more that has happened. Now, the interesting thing I find in all of this is Iran knew that most of those drones and missiles would be shot down. So it's a sort of performative act in many respects, but at the same time, the sympathy and the world sympathy, including the UK's, from a lot of the West anyway, has gone back to Israel. And that's a very interesting position to be in. Where it goes now, I think, is in Netanyahu's hands. David Cameron and Rishi Sunak, who spoke to him last night on the phone, spoke to Netanyahu last night on the phone, will want to influence that in some ways as much as the UK can. Yes, we are a G7 nation, but at the end of the day, Netanyahu has almost always done what he wants to do and what he feels is best for Israel. And let's face it, that is his role as Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Dr. Kim Howells, Israel is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, isn't it? So this isn't a dictatorship. We're not talking about Putin doing exactly what he wants to do in Ukraine and feeding Russians a story about what happened when he gets back again. This isn't the same in Israel at all. A tiny country where everyone knows everyone, and everyone who wants to vote has voted. So, Netanyahu doesn't just have free rein to do whatever he likes, does he?
No, he certainly does not. But he's in a very precarious position himself, politically, within Israel, of course. Many people blame him for that lack of vigilance back in October 7th when that murderous invasion by Hamas occurred. Yeah. So he must feel vulnerable about that. He wants to appear to be somebody who's a very, very strong leader, militarily, that he's the voice of Israel. And he's trying to repair the damage that he suffered at that time. And it's not an easy job to do. No. Nobody's arguing that. But he's got to choose very, very carefully now which way he's going to go. If he's going to retain the kind of support that we've just heard about, it's not easy for him. And I think that in a democracy, one that's as accountable as Israel is to its people, the government has to be very, very careful about its next move.
And Dr. Efrat Sopher, Iran's aim in all of this, what is Iran trying to do? Is it too simple to say eradicate Israel and push all Israelis into the sea? Is that pretty much the ultimate goal? Is that what's going on? Is this a move towards that?
Ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, there was a major shift against Israel, and the aim, I believe, is, and the threats have indeed been, to eradicate Israel, and that Israel sees as an existential threat. And so but it must be remarked that it's not the Iranian people. There have been reports coming out of Iran today. We've seen graffiti, for example, and trending on the social media from Iranians inside Iran saying, Israel, please strike us, we will finish the job on the streets of Iran. And so there must be a distinction made between the very dangerous Islamic regime, which has been the father organization of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has sponsored terrorism to the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And so basically 99% of international terrorism. And so it's the regime itself that really does pose a danger, not only to Israel, but also to the West and to Gulf states.
Let me ask you a question I don't hear asked often enough, really, Dr. Sopher. What is life like inside Iran, particularly for people who are old enough to remember what it was like before 1979? Let's imagine you were leading an interesting, fulfilling, decent, respectable kind of life before 1979. How would that life have changed, and how might you be feeling about it even to this day?
That's a really excellent question, Vanessa, because life in Iran before 1979 was modern. Ironically, relations with Israel were excellent, covert, yes, excellent. And women had equal rights to men. Everyone was very educated thanks to the Shah's White Revolution. And the future was rosy. Iran was an integrated member of the international community. And now Iranians face shortages of food, of water, of resources. Women are increasingly prosecuted for not covering their heads, for all sorts of random acts that are seen as disobedience. And these laws, as the regime becomes endangered, are getting harsher and harsher. And these are educated people who really are interested in relations with the international community. So they're feeling very alienated and I think quite hard done by their own government.
So if you were a secular family before 1979, would you be forced into some kind of observant orthodoxy, or would you be able to continue a secular life under that regime?
One was able to continue a secular life. There was freedom of religion, and so Baha'is, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians lived and worshipped freely. Now Christians are being persecuted. There is a very small Jewish community that is very closely watched by the Islamic regime, and Baha'is are very, very frequently prosecuted. So there are very harsh laws against non-Islamic worship. And so it's a very, very difficult place to live right now.
And astoundingly, Peter, a faction of MPs, particularly on the left of the House of Commons, deplores our involvement in helping Israel on Saturday night, and in fact argues quite vociferously against it.
Yes, indeed, and listen, those anti-Israeli voices of people like George Galloway, Jeremy Corbyn and others are always going to be there. That is always going to be the case, and there is no consensus across Parliament, although most MPs are certainly thinking that Israel should be an ally and is a key strategic ally, and there's no threat to that from the Labour, probably incoming Labour government. So certainly the vast majority of politicians in the UK realise that it is important to protect Israel and Israel's right to exist, and existential threats, including when they come from Iran. But yes, there will, of course, George Galloway, elected recently, and a very very strong member of Parliament, has made many speeches even already, even in the last few weeks, on this particular issue. And there are various others as well, like Jeremy Corbyn, for example, John McDonnell, the left, hard left of the Labour Party, who are very anti-Israel and always will be, no matter what kind of peril Israel is put in.
And it's not even so much, anti-Israel and always will be. It's looking at the regime that they support. So if you look at the Iranian regime, you listen to Dr. Sopher's description of life under that regime, and the oppression and the bigotry and the misogyny and all the other elements of life-crushing force that come with it. And then you wonder, or you ask George Galloway or Jeremy Corbyn, what is it about this regime that calls to you? What is it about it that you like? Why do you like it? Why do you prefer it to democracy in Israel? What's the answer?
I'd love to ask them that question.
Yeah.
I'd love to speak to both of them about that particular issue. It's something they've campaigned upon in many years. I mean, people like Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sure George Galloway would say as well, that they deplore all racism, for example, but certainly when it comes to Israel, they're no great fans of that country.
Let me ask Dr. Howells that question. What is it that so draws members of the Labour Party, not all of them, but quite a large phalanx of them, to support a regime that's been described by Dr. Sopher in ways that really do chill you to the bone? What is it that they like about it?
I think you've got to turn it right round. They hate the United Kingdom. They hate the idea of Britain. They see it as a capitalist system that's worked. We live in a very free society, in a very strong democracy. They loathe it. In the old days, they supported the Soviet Union. It was such an attractive thing to be out there fighting against the United Kingdom, this great ally of American capitalism. And that's what they hate. They'll always hate it. It's impossible for me to explain. I could never do it. I mean, they supported the IRA, murderous organizations. They do it now. Their sympathies were with Hamas and probably remain with Hamas. And the idea that they would ever try to justify an Israeli fight back against the existentialist threat that's posed to that country and has been posed to it ever since it was founded after the Second World War, they would never do that. Not a chance in hell. They'd support any organization rather than say, yes, we believe in Britain and we believe in the British way of life and in British democracy. They won't do it ever. And I'm afraid to say that that's something the left generally has always been very soft on. They're always willing to put up with it. A lot of them have always loved being in opposition and loved extolling the virtues of various horrible dictators like Saddam Hussein.
Thank you all very much indeed. Absolutely. I'm still as mystified at the end of that conversation as I was at the beginning, but thank you so much. Coming up after the break, government